I will ask Ros Barr to make a comment after we've had a couple of other comments. Yeah, all I can see is councillors' hands, but if councillors want to speak, they should do. Yes, just there. The microphone's right with you, Ruth. Okay. Former President, I beg your pardon.
Can you hear this one? Yes, it is very much like what we have presently, and yes, in principle it works. My name is Susan Ware and I teach professional practice at Bartlet. However, we've just gone through a major recession, and although it would be very good if our students were able to acquire suitable experience within the 7-year period, we absolutely must have a very flexible opportunity for students to obtain experience over a longer period of time. So I think the way it's drafted suggests that it's pretty fixed, the 7-year period. I would like to see perhaps a little bit more attention to the drafting. And the other point that's been raised, which I'm sure that everybody amongst here who is also a professional studies teacher or somebody who examines in professional studies is aware of the enormous diversity of the quality of the experience and the learning outcomes that students gain from this period. It's very easy to clock up on your PDR 2 years experience, but what we look for when we're examining, when I look for when I'm teaching, is the quality, the range, the students' understanding of that experience. And finally, is it experience or is it training? I think the EU directive refers to training. I think we're waiting for some sort of guidance on what the difference is between experience and training. If it's training, that may produce a greater impact on practitioners and practice to deliver more prescribed outcomes.
Thank you. Ruth Reid, PPR IBA.
Thank you, Paul. I'm no longer a Part 3 course director and I'm no longer a member of council, and I've probably been here far too long, but what I'd like to point out is that what we're doing with this motion, in my belief, is setting the minimum. What we need to be going to do throughout the rest of the day is driving forward a flexible approach that rids us of this Darwinian process of excluding people from the profession by the attrition of the economy above everything else. We've just come through, as Sue says, a very long recession. There will be a lot of people who have come through architectural education in the last 5 years, as at the beginning of the 90s, who don't go on to give the benefit to society of their education. And I think it's very important that we set the bar with this recommendation now, that's the minimum that we're going to have, and then talk about the flexibility of how to make entry to the profession available to a far wider number of the students that are coming through our schools with their extraordinary talent than we are able to put through at the moment. The statistics speak for themselves, and we do need to sort this out.
Thank you very much. There are 2 speakers over here. Okay, you go first, and then there are 2 more up there.
Hi, I'm Nela Zoysa, International Council member of the RIBA. I'm just going to discuss 2 experiences I've had in Sri Lanka. We have 2 schools of architecture, which is the Moratori University School of Architecture and the CSA School of Architecture. Both the schools are RIBA accredited. For the first time, I examined the 3-year full-time course in CSA, and I found that they were far better. In fact, I commented this to Professor David Gloster, that they were far better degree of design than the 4-year part-time course. And I definitely endorse the 2 years practical experience because I'm a practitioner, although I am interested in education. And I would say that within the 7 years, we have to have the 2-year practical experience. And at CSA, we do 3+1 out under a counselor's guidance. And we have the 3 years again, plus 3 years part-time, plus 1 out. So we have the 2 years. At Moratori University, we do 5 years straight on and 2 years out. Practical experience under counsellor's guidance. Thank you.
Thank you. If we can pass that microphone back a couple of rows. There's a gentleman in blue, and then there's a lady in, looks like leopard skin. I'm sure it's not real.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Bradick. I'm not a counsellor. I've got a couple of questions, please. Picking up on John Assel's comments, are there future proposals in the pipeline to actually bring about a more rigid framework of what needs to be covered within that practical experience to ensure students aren't just sitting in front of computer screens? And also, are there any future proposals being planned to help small and micro practices actually take on and give students the experience they need?
Thank you very much. I'll ask someone to pick that up in a minute, but let's take another contribution. 2 rows back. There we are.
Hi, it's Fionn, Stevenson here, Head of School of Architecture at Sheffield. I really welcome the efforts by the RIBA and the education sector to promote practice and the integration of practice with education. I just have a question which I think will probably be a theme for the day, which is related to governance. I understand we're talking about principles here, but in terms of governance, if we go back to Neil McLaughlin's presentation, he said that the degree of alienation was partly due to the lack of clarity about who was responsible for what, vis-a-vis, is it education, the RIBA, or practices that are responsible for determining quality and time commitments. So my question to the RIBA is, if we vote for this motion, who will be responsible for guaranteeing that the students actually get the 2 years of practice within 7 years?
Good question. I'll ask David to pick that one up, and then I'll ask Ros to make comments on the previous question and 1 or 2 others we've had. David.
I think the point that both Fionn and John have raised about the definitions of professional practical experience are extremely important. We're extremely sensitive to the fact that patterns of practice have changed very substantially, and the experience that somebody may have accumulating their monitored professional practical experience now is very different from 2 or 3 or 4 decades ago. The reality, of course, is that the PEDR does provide a decent and thorough and rigorous appraisal of the breadth and depth and scope of that PPE, which isn't to say that a corollary of today's debate shouldn't be further examination to make sure that it's yet more fit for purpose. So certainly today's discussion, I think we must establish, is the beginning of a process. The detailed implementation of this is a question of careful, considerate and measured and constructive debate between every stakeholder in architectural education to drive forward exactly the changes which our speakers are proposing.
Thank you. Ros.
Yeah, I think that answers also the previous point. I sit here as VP for Education, as a practitioner, an educator, a mentor in practice, an examiner in universities of education. And so my responsibility is across all the fields of architecture, and that is my responsibility within my practice to assure quality to my clients and to universities and schools that I'm involved with. And I think what this sets out today is to look at the context of architectural education, and the speakers we've heard this morning from Brett, Flora, Neil, John, are all picking up on things that we'll hear much more of today. It's such a broad subject, but I really think that we need to start and hope today to set this context, and the RIBA's responsibility from now until we can carry forward some of these motions will be to look at the detail of how we can work within frameworks which need to be flexible on how we deliver that.
May I ask one question, which is, can we assume, just for clarity, that the 7-year period, that is also a minimum, as well as the 2 years practical experience within it?
I think the important thing is to refer to some of the footnotes which relate to the recommendations, because the important thing with this, one of our speakers for the next session, Kate Herron, I've quoted this back at Kate before, but I remember about a year ago, we were in a session of the RIBA Education Review, and Kate said it's extremely important that we don't introduce another inflexible system to replace the existing inflexible system. These words, I think, became very much the leitmotif of the Education Review. This is all about interpretation, flexibility, the maximum number of models for architectural education that remain fit for purpose. This is about the beginning of a creative reappraisal and refreshment of the process. Yes, typically, we're looking at a 7-year period. We are bound by statute. I mean, it's quite important to realise this. The changes in the Qualifications Directive have shifted the goalposts in terms of provision. Yes, typically perhaps a 7-year period, but as other recommendations that we're discussing today consider, there's a lot of room within that. And the point about our role at the RIBA, in RIBA education, and our relationship with all architectural education stakeholders is discussing multivalent ways forward to produce the practitioners of tomorrow. It's not about sewing ourselves into the straitjacket.
Thank you very much. I think it's time to move to the first formal motion of the day. I'm handing over to Stephen Hodder because this part is a formal action by council members who will be invited to vote on the motion. Stephen.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, we have a proposed amendment to the recommendation by Elspeth. Roger, do you want to propose the revised wording, please?
Yes, bearing in mind that I've got to switch this on.
No, it's on.
Bearing in mind that this is, as David said, the beginning of a further discussion, I propose some additional words to the recommendation. And so it would then read a requirement for a minimum of 2 years of assessed professional practical experience, which picks up Elspeth's point but leaves flexibility, PPE, and then within typically a minimum 7-year period, which picks up Sue Ware's point to allow the flexibility. And I think that's the revised consensus motion, and I propose that we vote once on that.
Are you happy with that wording, Elspeth? Okay.
Is Sue happy with that?
Right.
Are council members happy with that? No, with the process, I mean.
I think by putting the 7 year, we've worked the 7 year in there, he's putting me back in a straight jacket. It should be within the period of qualification. I second that.
The expressions that have been made are that 7 years is the typical minimum. By keeping the word typical, there is still some flexibility, and when we come to the detailed discussions, we can work that out.
But there are situations where mature students will come to a course with experience in place before this process.
Yes.
Who may well be able to qualify within 5 years.
Yes.
We need to take account of that and therefore leave this flexible.
I think the motion leaves that flexibility because of the word typically.
Typically.
Can we just be clear? Elspeth has proposed an amendment. Roger has proposed a form of wording, okay? And what I'm proposing is that we now vote on that revised wording, okay, on that revised recommendation, okay? Now, all council members, do you all have one of these, okay? All right, so this is going to be an interesting test.
Yes. If you want to put it on the screen then,
Hang on.
Can't do it at the time. Hang on. I'll read it out at dictation speed. Okay.
Roger, are we clear?
Shall I read it out at dictation
Yeah,
speed?
please.
Because somebody needs to write it down.
Chair, just Gerald Bearman, ex-council, just to be absolutely clear on the procedure, when an amendment to a motion has been put forward and it's subsequently seconded, does council not then need to
Votes on that substantive motion. Correct. Correct.
If it's not carried, it reverts to the original
Correct.
motion.
Correct.
Just to be clear.
Correct. Well remembered, Jared.
Do you want to do it that way?
Yeah.
And vote
Yes,
twice?
please.
Okay. I was first of all,
no.
I was trying to move things along. Council can change that as it goes along if it wants to. Secondly, I hope that these all work. I've been trying to get Classic FM on mine and it doesn't work. But the revised motion then, which is put by Elspeth and seconded by me, is as follows, which is a requirement for a minimum of 2 years of assessed professional practical experience, PPE, within typically a minimum 7-year period. That's the amendment that's now.
All right, is everybody clear on that wording? Okay. Now, so as Gerard said, we now need to vote on that amendment, and if we agree to that, that becomes then the substantive recommendation. Now, my understanding is, I just need clarification of this. It's A, B, and C. Hayley, it's A, B, and C, isn't it?
Yes, the voting cycle will be after the second, they're just putting it up with the revised wording.
Okay. Technology comes to the RIBA, it's wonderful, isn't it? So does that's the revised wording, and so it's very clear, I think, that A is for yes, B is for no, and C is to abstain. Okay? So if council members can press now, please. Presumably comes out well. Do we have a...
What's the outcome?
Yeah, everybody's voted. I hope so, anyway. Right.
28.
Okay, so just here on the left-hand corner, for those who can't see it, 28 council members voted yes, and 1 council member voted no for that amendment. So that now becomes the substantive recommendation, and so we now have to vote again on that. So that becomes a substantive recommendation. We now have to vote again on that recommendation. So again, A for yes, B for no, C for abstain.
Come on, 3 more. 2 more. 1 more.
Okay, that recommendation is approved. Thank you very much. Now, we're going to break for coffee. Can I ask everyone to be back here promptly at 10 to 12, please?